Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
At this point, we go around and introduce ourselves, and then I'll introduce our speakers. So let me start with myself. Almost Waldo.
Vin.
Pat.
I'm Joe.
I'm Frank.
My name is Gary.
I'm Tom.
My name is Mark.
Jeff.
My name is Jerry.
I'm Richard.
I'm Lee.
My name is Cass.
I'm Jack.
My name is Dennis.
My name is David.
Al.
Jim. Peter.
I'm Hal.
My name is Harley.
I'm Larry.
My name is Michael.
My name is Tom.
My name is Alzak.
So it is my pleasure to introduce once again a friend of our Sangha, a frequent visitor. That's always welcome here. Pamela Weiss has practiced in the Zen and Theravada tradition of Buddhism for over 25 years, including several years of Zen monastic training. She completed teacher's training with Jack Cornfield through Spirit Rock and leads a Wednesday evening sitting group at SF Insight, and teaches classes, workshops, and retreats internationally. Pamela is also an executive coach and the founder of Appropriate Response, a company dedicated to bringing the principles and practices of Buddhism into the workplace. So, welcome once again.
Thank you. It's nice to be here this morning. Happy Father's Day to everyone. Weeks like this test us, don't they? I made a strong statement a moment ago that love was always stronger than hate. Sometimes we wonder. I do. So I thought I would talk to you a bit about love and hate this morning, and particularly from a Buddhist understanding of how we cultivate one and meet the other. The Buddha said, hatred never ends from hatred. From love alone does hatred cease. This is the ancient law, true and inexhaustible. Hatred never ends from hatred. From love alone does hatred cease. This is the ancient law, true and inexhaustible. I think it's worth saying a little bit first about what is meant by love. Because I think in our world, in our culture particularly, we've had love reduced to smiley faces and Hallmark holidays and something akin to maybe being nice. And I would propose to you that while being nice can be a useful way to move about the world, that's not what love is. Love, in fact, is not a feeling so much, an emotion, as it is a force, and a force to be reckoned with. Love, in the context of Buddhist teaching, is it's the truth of our deep, deep connectedness, so that when we see a child fall down, or when we hear or see or read about someone shot down, we feel the pain in our own hearts. We feel that because we are, in fact, deeply, deeply connected. Hate happens when that connection is severed, when we lose that strength of the web of connectivity that holds us all, that binds us all together. Maya Angelou, the late great Maya Angelou, said, "Love recognizes no barriers. It jumps hurdles, leaps fences, penetrates walls to arrive at its destination full of hope." And probably all of you have had some taste of the power of love. You read stories about mothers, lifting cars off the body of a child caught underneath. That kind of love. That it's a love, it's a power that allows us to be willing to put ourselves at risk to help, to serve someone else. And whether those acts are heroic or quiet, they all come from that same source. It's not a small thing, but we can lose our connection to it. In Buddhist teaching, there is an understanding of what the Buddha described as, it's not great language, but it's often called the 3 poisons, which would be a way of understanding where it is that the truth of our fundamental love, the truth of this connectivity, gets kind of skewed, confused, disoriented, broken. So the 3 poisons are described as greed. You know what happens when love turns into greed? It's not usually very pretty. And certainly we see again in our culture, culture that is just dominated by sort of endless and excessive wanting, trying to get. And the flip side of that greed is what the Buddha called hatred, which is aversion, not wanting. So the basic Buddhist psychology says that every moment of our experience, you could check this out for yourself, and these moments happen very fast, so you have to be quick. Every moment of experience is colored, flavored by one of 3 characteristics. It's very simple, actually. Every moment is either pleasant, unpleasant, or what he called neither pleasant nor unpleasant, which is we refer to as neutral. This is the technical language is that each moment of experience has a vedana, has a feeling tone to it, but there's only 3 flavors. So a pleasant experience comes along, and we generally like it, we want it, we grab onto it, we try, like that. This is just the natural kind of reptilian brain response. And there's actually nothing necessarily wrong with that, except that you don't want to live there all the time. And the reason you don't want to live there all the time is because it's endless. Wanting. Each moment is going to arise with something, and you just keep grabbing. And also, if you notice, while the moment may be pleasant, the grabbing is unpleasant. So you're actually killing a pleasant moment every time you grab and try to hold on to it. Again, if you think about this in a more sophisticated way in terms of things you've tried to hold on to in your own life, what happens? So the flip side of that, greed, wanting, is unpleasant. So an unpleasant experience moment comes along, and we don't want. we don't like, we don't want, we push away, we reject, we toughen, we harden, we resist. And so if we don't pay attention, our lives can just end up at being this, like getting batted back and forth between pleasant and unpleasant. And pleasant and unpleasant is happening all the time. But if we aren't paying attention, if we aren't practicing, noticing that it's happening, it's not just pleasant and unpleasant, it's pleasant, grab, unpleasant, push away. And we end up with this kind of getting bounced around, this constant reverberation. Some people would call that stress. We're constantly looking to get away from, because we think it will make us happy. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be happy. The problem is that strategy is completely false. It doesn't work. I'm guessing that all of you know that, or you wouldn't have showed up here on a Sunday morning, on Father's Day. Like, I tried all that and it didn't work. So let's try something else. And remember that even if you're trying something else, that doesn't mean, this is what in our naive way we imagine, well, if I just practice meditation, we imagine falsely that what that will mean is eventually I'll have only pleasant experiences. And I'll get rid of all the unpleasant ones. That's really what we think. And if we're sitting and we're having unpleasant experience, we think, what am I doing wrong? Or who's to blame? This is the mind that if we're not careful, this is a mind of hate. This is a mind that begins to try to set up walls to protect ourselves. And I mean that literally and figuratively both. We begin to harden ourselves. We begin to hang on to our views and opinions and beliefs. And if we're in positions of power, God forbid, we literally build institutions and pass laws. And for some of us, if we have our way, we literally will build walls to try to keep those evil others out, right? Those others who are going to do harm, who are going to create unpleasant experience for I, me, and mine. So my point in saying this is that our practice of watching this unfold and catching on to it is not a small thing. Actually, it's the very source of where we escalate into madness. Some of you may know there's a wonderful definition of mindfulness, the word sati. And the most common definition of mindfulness is something like, moment-to-moment awareness of whatever's arising without judgment. There is another definition, my personal favorite. It's one of the roots of the word sati, which is described as simply the absence of madness. And I think it's a great definition, because practicing in this way where we can notice the arising of wanting and not wanting, and if we're honest, if we're careful, we'll see it every moment. But we can find a way not to be batted around by it. We can find what the Buddha called a middle path, a place of a kind of stability and steadiness in the midst of all of that. And certainly that kind of stability and steadiness is what's needed when the world turns up the volume and we see hatred just blaring across the TV and the radio and the newspaper. Now, I think it's important. Oh, there's one more, which I didn't say, which was what we call neither pleasant or unpleasant. So the Buddha described these three poisons: greed, hatred, and delusion. So delusion is actually the seed. And the idea is that we believe all this. We believe that there really is a separate, solid I, me, and mine. And then we think it really is important to get rid of all those people who are unpleasant and all those situations that are unpleasant, and to try to get as much of the pleasant as we... So all of that grasping and aversion comes from the distorted understanding or the unclear seeing that I am a separate, solid, independent being. That belief, which is in itself, cuts me off from this web of love, this web of connectivity, is where the problem begins. So all of us have the opportunity to watch this. And to watch it in ourselves, not from a place of being punitive, bad self. No. Self is very useful. I often say, when you leave today, it would be good if you take your shoes, not somebody else's, right? Right? So there's a place, there's a kind of relative reality in which, no, this is my watch, and those are your socks. And that's good. But when we pay attention, and part of our meditative practice is to start to notice that, I don't know, you see what it's like. Maybe when you walked in here this morning, you had one kind of mood, or your body felt one way. And by the time you leave 2 hours later, it might be different. You might notice the continuous flow of thoughts, feelings, ideas, sensations, sounds as you sit. That is how it is. Life is this wild river of experience. And in the midst of that river, there is this amazing thing called awareness, that all of these moments of experience can be known. Not only can they are being known. But we don't pay attention to the knowing. It happens spontaneously. We pay attention to the pleasant and unpleasant experience. We get all caught up over there. So the meditative process is one in which we're invited to, we don't have to stop anything. All we have to do is start to notice that this is happening. And when we do that, instead of grab, push away, we start to have a sense of wonder, of beauty. It reconnects us to this loving web of connectivity that we're part of, because we see it unfolding in us as us. I think that it's important to understand also that love, as I'm talking about it, is not passive. When I say that love is a force, I mean that it is a place from which we can act. Some of you probably know this beautiful quote from Dr. King. He said, "Power without love is reckless and abusive." This would be a good motto for our next round of political unfoldings. Power without love is reckless and abusive. Love without power is sentimental and anemic. In other words, love is not about passivity. Real love is love plus power, which gives us the capacity for agency, the capacity to act. But again, if we're honest, so much of our action is actually reaction, right? So much we think we're in charge, right? And I think anybody who's sat for 30 minutes quietly is pretty much catches on. Like, no, I did not order this movie. I'm not in charge here, right? But something is happening. And if we don't start to pay attention, then we're in this constant state of reactivity, of pleasant, unpleasant, wanting, not wanting, liking, not liking, grasping, pushing away. This is reactivity. Love gives us a different ground to move from, to act from, a place that's other than greed, hatred, confusion. Love is solid ground. although where is it? We can't nail it down, which is probably a good thing. I went looking on the internet, which is the modern way that if you're a Dharma teacher, that's where you go for trying to get, interesting stuff. And I found some actually really interesting things. And I want to read you a beautiful piece, and I'll tell you at the end who said it. Some of you may have heard or read this already, but it surprised me. So the quote is, "It's as if there is a national script that we have learned, and I think by accepting the script, we tacitly accept that the script will end the same way every time, with nothing changing, except for the loved ones of the families and victims for whom nothing will ever be the same." He was speaking about the massacre in Orlando. He said, "It's easy, it's almost tempting to be paralyzed by such a monstrously hateful act, to despair. Well, I don't know what to do, but I do know that despair is a victory for hate. Hate wants us to be too weak to change anything. And the people in Orlando were targeted because of who they love. And there have been outpourings of love throughout the country and around the world. Love in response to hate. Love does not despair. Love makes us strong." With musical accompaniment. Love gives us the courage to act. Love gives us hope that change is possible. Love allows us to change the script. So love your country, love your family, love the families of the victims and the people of Orlando, but please let's remember that love is a verb, and to love means to do something. Does anybody know who said that?
Hillary?
It's the last I read this recently, and somebody else said Obama also. Stephen Colbert. So for a political late-night comedian, snarky guy, he just let it rip. He was clearly so touched by what was happening that he said something very beautiful and true. So you hear in this that there is a call. Love is a call to action, and there is a question about how do we navigate this without falling into despair on one side, or allowing ourselves to just fan the flames of hate, adding hatred to hatred. And this is so difficult, really difficult. And I would say for all of us that if you find yourself in a moment of despair, or maybe many moments of despair, please don't feel bad. It's okay to feel despairing. You just don't want to stay there forever. It's okay to feel fury, rage. You just don't want to have your actions come from that place. So we make room for all of it. Right? This is what the practice is for, is to be able to tolerate the intensity of what we experience, all of us as human beings, but ultimately to find a way to allow all of it to come through so that we can rest back into the arms of this web of being, and to let that move us forward into action. I'll read you one more and then we'll open it up. A couple more things. The Buddha has this ancient little poem about pointing us in the direction of how to do that. And it's a beautiful image. He says, who can untangle this tangle? It's actually it's an interaction between the Buddha and it's called the Jata Sutta, which suggests that somebody named Jata comes to the Buddha and says, who can untangle this tangle? In other words, how do we find our way through this knotted web of hate and despair, of grasping and aversion? Who can untangle this tangle? The Buddha says, a tangle within, a tangle without, outside. People are entangled in a tangle. Sure feels that way, doesn't it? So this is the speaker coming to the Buddha, the wanderer Jata. A tangle within, a tangle without. People are entangled in a tangle. Gautama, the Buddha. I ask you, who can untangle this tangle? The Buddha says, a person established in integrity, developing discernment and mindfulness, ardent and clear, they can untangle this tangle. So there is this understanding in Buddhist teaching that the capacity to have integrity, to be upright, to not just get batted back and forth between our grasping and delusion, and to do that in a way that we are clear. We're seeing clearly what's happening. And a lot of what's happening, my friends, is really bad. So it takes a lot. It takes, I will say it this way, more than just being nice to be able to untangle the tangle. It takes strength, it takes commitment, it takes courage, it takes community, it takes a lot. But untangling a tangle, if you think about it, if you have something that's all tangled up, how do you untangle it? Slowly, steadily, you begin to aerate, right? A tangle is when the threads of the web go like this, and they get all meshed together, and there's no breathing room. We can't see clearly. It gets just all crunched. And so untangling the tangle is beginning to give ourselves and each other a kind of spaciousness and clarity and ability to see what's happening so that we can pull the threads out. And after we've done that, we don't have a tangle anymore. We have this beautiful web. We have this beautiful web of connectivity. So I have more to say, but I would love to hear a bit from anyone who'd like to ask or speak or share something from your own heart or reflection. Please.
What did you Google that led you to Stephen Colbert?
That was a good question. That's the World Wide Web. You follow one string and it gets you somewhere. Yeah, Stephen Colbert did not quote the Buddha, just to be clear about that. That's a good question. I think that I probably started with Orlando and followed one thing to the next and somehow got to Stephen Colbert, or I may have seen it on someone's Facebook page. That's another possibility. I can't actually remember where that was. Yeah.
Facebook is the other Google.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's a kind of, for better or worse, but there's a kind of connectedness and web that can happen in those places. A lot of it is not that helpful and can be, as you know, probably just suck all of your time. But from time to time, you can find really amazing things and stories. This morning I read a story that was also on someone's Facebook page about a woman who was a grandmother, and she was flying on JetBlue to Orlando for the funeral service for her 20-year-old grandson. And she was distraught on the flight. And it was a beautiful story. They said that the staff on JetBlue just totally took care of her. Like they just assisted her getting onto the plane while she was on the plane, etc. And then the passengers began to understand, her story, hear her story. And so someone came up with the idea that they write, a card for her. But instead of a card, that said condolences with a bunch of names, people just poured out pages and pages of, sharing their grief with her grief, and gave it to her. And the story I read closed with someone who worked for JetBlue just saying how inspiring it was to work for a place where the staff and then also the passengers were so kind, and that in her case it had given her the faith again, to see that yes, there is madness, but also there is this extraordinary capacity for all of us to respond to each other with care and with love. So.
Just to follow up on that one, I did get to see a picture where everybody on the plane was going like this. It was taken from, you could see the whole plane full of people. All doing the
Everyone's making a heart, with their hands. And these are stories that are telling us about love as a force. That it's not a weak thing. It's strong, and it's part of us, and we can look for ways to tap into that. We don't have to create it; it's already here. Please.
I wanted to hear more about anger.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard, some people say without anger there wouldn't be a motivation to battle injustice, or and then you talked about you don't want to act out of anger. I've seen protests for peace and protests for injustice, and there seems like there's loads of anger. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are.
I think of anger as being like heat. It's like a fire. It's a kind of red energy. And, we live, all of us, because we are in the shadow. It's not the right way to say it. We're in the line of this big ball of fire called the sun. So we need it. We need that heat. We need that just to stay alive. And yet, we all know that literally if you touch it, it gets too close, or if you're unskillful with it, you get burned. Right? And we imagine, there's a metaphor the Buddha uses about, we think that if we throw our anger at someone else, it will harm them. But he uses the metaphor of, it's like picking up a coal. Actually, it's your hand that gets burned. Right? So, I think there is a place for feeling the energy of anger, because it's a vital force. And I think we have to be very, very careful, because probably everyone here has been either on the receiving end of anger where it was not helpful, or you've experienced getting angry and feeling how it can burn. It burns us as well. So it takes a lot of skill, I think, to use that anger skillfully. But I don't think that just trying to get rid of it or push it away is ever the answer. right? Because it's part of us. It's part of our life energy. And, in Tibetan Buddhism, they talk about the transformation of anger becomes clarity. And I've seen that to be true for myself, that when I get kind of confused and muddled and begin to shrink back, and then sometimes I find a kind of sword like, oh, here's what's important, here's what I care about. And then I don't necessarily have to go say it with anger, but that energy can help clarify. So I don't know if that helps. It's not an either or answer, I don't think. And that's true for any of the range of emotions that we feel as human beings. Even happiness can just turn into kind of a giddiness that's not that useful. Sadness, which can be so beautiful actually, and true and nurturing, can also fall into despair. So anger as fire, life force, good. Anger when it believes that there's someone to blame, that tends to create some problems. I remember once, this is many, many, many years ago, I had this energy. I was sitting one of my first Zen retreats, and I started having this energy come through my body, and it would come up from the base of my spine, and I had this image of lifting a chair and throwing it across the room. This was spontaneous. And thankfully I didn't do that. But I started to play with it and to notice, okay, what if I don't throw the chair? Because that was just the image on top of the energy, right? And then I started to feel the energy, and it took me into a sort of state of aliveness that was actually kind of hard to tolerate. But I think that can be part of what happens. When we feel something strongly, we imagine that we have to act it out, or we have to repress it. That's usually the way we go with anger. And can we have the clarity, the integrity, the courage to actually feel that level of intensity? Most of us can't do it very well. And therefore anger becomes something not so skillful. But if we can, then we get some of there are, as you said, there are protests against things that are wrong that come in with incredible clarity. And it's beautiful, actually. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I recently read an article written by, I think he was the former senior editor of the World Religions Spirituality place on Huffington Post, and it was titled "Enough with Accommodating Religious Hatred." And what stood out about his piece was he gave the example of a church where somebody would welcome her and they were really embracing some gay couple or something, and his senior in the church came to them afterwards and said, "I said welcome, not condone." And it just falls into the category where some other person I was reading wrote about being a member of gay people being in the log cabin Republicans. And I hope I'm not offending anybody. He said, "What is it enough that they'll put up with you?" And that how many situations we ingratiate ourselves into so that someone will put up with us. And I heard it as a powerful statement of ferocious love.
Yeah.
That's just not enough.
Yeah.
Enough of that.
Yeah. And I think to your point, there's a way in which when we treat ourselves, and I mean the many, many parts of ourselves, like, oh, I'll put up with that.
Yeah.
I'll put up with the fact that I'm gay. I'm put up with the fact that I'm born in a woman's body. I'll put up with the fact that I'm whatever it is, right? Those internal attitudes get projected out. So we don't work with them just one place or the other. But the dynamics are actually the same in a certain way, that what we see in here gets broadcast out into the world. And so the work that all of you and all of us do in having the courage to sit still and be present with all of the stuff inside, again, it's not a small thing.
No, it's
because
a conditionality about loving ourselves.
That's right. So if we can learn to move beyond tolerating ourselves to actually fiercely loving ourselves, right? Being willing to take a stand for our humanity and the humanity of others, great. And then when that happens, our actions come from a more skillful place, right? And there is hatred in the world that is born out of tremendous suffering and confusion. But the fact that it's born out of suffering and confusion doesn't mean we condone it. That's what we don't condone, right? Yeah. 1, 2, yeah.
It's, it kind of reminds me of the difference, or the sort of looking at the difference between tolerance and acceptance and outright love. Because it seems like tolerance still has this residual resentment of having to put up with something the way it is. I can see people on like one end of the spectrum preaching tolerance, but in reality they're just stuffing down what they really want to act on, and so there's this danger of that still erupting.
Right.
It's very different than acceptance or love.
Yeah, a tolerance is kind of like basic don't like with a little veneer of kindness over it. But it doesn't sink in very deep, does it? Yeah, and it's to actually be able to move through the world understanding that everyone else like you is struggling to love themselves fully, and that we share that as human beings. So then we do the best we can, And it doesn't mean that we're not going to act out of greed or hatred. It doesn't mean, certainly, that we're not going to feel greed or hatred or confusion or despair. What it means is that we are committing ourselves to finding a way to having our lives be not just that. Right? And it's a both individual and collective movement. Because you could be doing just fine, but if everybody else is still a wreck, the world you live in will still be a wreck. So we do it together, and we also do it individually. Nobody else can do your work for you, and yet you don't do it alone. It's this interesting paradox of being human. Please.
You may have answered my question already in several statements you've made, answering the last few. But I tend to push away and not even acknowledge, or sometimes not even be aware of, negative emotions that I have. Despair, disappointment, anger, things like that. And so part of my, I think part of my practice or my goal is to be aware of those things and to let myself feel them and let them move through me. I guess my issue is that sometimes I wallow in them, and then there's not that sort of what it seemed like when you were doing the meditation, you were sort of almost saying it naturally can transform into compassion for oneself, then becomes compassion for others. And I'm wondering if you could just speak to that, whether it can happen naturally or whether I need to just sort of nudge myself and like make the decision you just talked about.
So say just in your own words, what's make what decision?
The decision to say, okay, I love myself, I care about myself, I've heard what the issue is, now it's time to move on, focus elsewhere, focus on others.
Yeah, I don't think it happens quite that binary a way. Like, okay, now I love myself totally, now I can go do something. It's more a matter of noticing moment by moment Am I coming from love or I'm coming from hate? Self-love or self-hate? And no matter how much I fully love myself, there may be moments when I don't. And no matter how many moments that I don't, there may be moments that I do. So we're looking to be honest about where we're at. And I think two things about what you said. One is that you don't wait to love yourself completely to when you're not having any greed and aversion anymore. If you're willing to be present with your own greed and aversion, with your own despair, with your own anger, if you're really willing to, that is loving. That's a loving act to say, oh, look what's here. So it's not like those things go away and then you're loving, right? So it's much more, they go together. And I think that what you described, which my sense is true for so many of us, is that, if anger, despair, etc. are unpleasant, then what do? We push them away. And most of us have a lot of training, right? I don't know about you, but a lot of us, when we were kids and we got angry, were told, don't do that. Or when we were sad and we were crying, we're told to stop that, right? So even unconsciously, we may, without thinking about it, push it away. So then you can get to watch that. Wow, look at that. I just pushed that away. Notice that. That's a loving act. What tends to happen for many of us is that we consciously or unconsciously push away, push away, push away, push away. And then we give ourselves a time to feel, and there's this backlog. And then we wonder, well, I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to wallow. It's like an ocean of anger or sadness. But if we have, a release valve, if we're more present as it's happening moment by moment, then we're not necessarily going to have that big toggle from no, 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 no to, wallow, wallow, wallow. It's like the reverb that I was talking about, the greed aversion. Instead of going like this, it starts to go like this. And that has to do with bringing this kind of loving awareness more and more consistently. It's not an easy thing to do, but that's the aim. Yeah, please.
I think you're talking in a way about equanimity, finding that middle path that now enables you to sit with the whole range of emotions. And I'm glad you used the word binary, because I feel like we live in a binarized world.
Yes.
In which everything has to be black or white.
Yes.
And when we sit in the middle, we feel that we're in a continuum from this feeling tone to the other extreme feeling tone, which is the opposite.
That's right.
And I've found that this practice has helped me a lot to endure sorrow, because I seem more able to recognize it when it happens and to just say, that's sorrow, I acknowledge that, I'm feeling that.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't rule my life the way some passions can rule people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
That, to me, is the most valuable thing in
Mm-hmm.
this practice.
Yeah. So there is this ground of equanimity, but it's not dry, right? So that's the danger with equanimity, is that it can have kind of a distancing, keeping ourselves away from. And I think if we're going to talk about equanimity, that this other word, love, goes right together, because we care. We're not kind of pulling ourselves back from. So it's that too is a middle path movement, right? Equanimity in the traditional teaching is the fourth of what are called the Brahma-viharas. Brahma-viharas are qualities of the heart, of loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. So it's paired with these others. It's not just sort of hanging out there on its own. And they go together, those four. Yeah. I want to read one more piece to you as we're coming to a close here. This is from a Dharma brother of mine. His name's Greg Snyder, and he's one of the teachers at the Brooklyn Zen Center. And this is from his Facebook. And it speaks to sort of the how, because it's one thing to talk about all of this, and useful perhaps, but there is a question of how do we do this? So he says, I pray every person with a shred of sanity, especially those in privilege and power, train her or his heart on love, and from that place work to expose and heal hatred wherever we see it. I encourage us all to take up the practice of watching our every word and our silence, our every action and our inaction, every thought and distraction, every vote and political shrug of the shoulders, and ask ourselves again and again, right now, am I cultivating a world of love or a world of hate? We have to bring the world into our hearts and make love our first thought, our first intention for ourselves and every person we meet. Despite all we can do to each other, I choose to have faith in humanity. Yes, we can be a wind of fire that leaves scars and burning, but we are also dear and precious and deserving of our birthright of peace and happiness, every one of us. So he gives wonderful encouragement, but also instruction about as we move through our lives. And this is a key principle in Buddhist teaching, that karma, which literally translates as action. If you have karma in the middle, which is what we do or don't do, on the front end, we have our intention. And on the back end, we have the result. And it's understood that you can't control the result. What you can control, not even control, what you can pay attention to is your intention. And that's really embedded in his instruction. That as we move through the world, can we, as best we can, this is not meant to be instruction for you to beat yourself up with, can you, as best you can, pay attention to your intention and to reflect for yourself. This was the Buddha's instruction to his son, Rahula. He said, Rahula, before, in the middle, and after every karmic action, which means every thought, every deed, every word, so everything you think, everything you say, and everything you do, before, during, and after, consider, stop and reflect. Is this going to be beneficial or not? So Greg puts this simply, is this going to lead to more hate or more love? And all of us can do that. We maybe can't do it every action, every moment, but you and I and anyone else who wants to join us can take up the practice of, as we move through the world, to give ourselves enough space. This is how we untangle the tangle, to pause and consider, okay, is this email I'm about to send, is this phone call I'm about to make, is this thing I'm about to say or not say, is it going to lead to more love or more hate? It may cause you to be more confused, but that, I think, is a good thing. Because righteousness, and being absolutely sure of what, that's where we get ourselves into trouble. So please, I would encourage all of us to ask these questions as we go forward, and to know that as you ask them, you're not alone in doing so. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pamela. Yeah, it's a great talk. This one my job is to remind you about the Dana ball that's going to be passed around. That's what sustains our Sangha and all the things we do with it. Do we have any announcements? One announcement though, Hal reminded me about the next week's speaker, who's not going to be different from what's printed, so it will be our own David Lewis that will be doing the Dharma talk. And we have a host.
Hi, I'm the host for today. I brought some strawberries, chips, and teas, so please enjoy them. And I think no one is new here, but if you still want to be on the mailing list, there's a sign-up sheet out there. And about 12:30, people will gather in front of the front door and go for lunch together. So feel free to join them.
I just want to say that any of you are all, of course, quite warmly welcome to Wednesday evening sitting group at the Unitarian Church that I lead. I'm not always there on Wednesdays, so you can check sfinsight.org to see who's speaking. But I just want to extend my welcome. Please feel free.
Where is it located?
It's at the Unitarian Church, which is at Gough and Star King, near Japantown.
I just wanted to remind everybody, next week is the parade.
Yes.
But Larry Yang, who's been a teacher for us all these years, is the Grand Marshal.
Yes.
And actually Spirit Rock is going to have a
contingent
float. And in the past number of years, the San Francisco Zen Center also has had a contingent, and I imagine there will be several other Buddhist groups of the city there. So it's a very joyous, wonderful event. And to support Larry too.
Yeah.
For those of you who might want to mark your calendars for our annual retreat, it's a little over 3 months away, but it's going to happen September 29th to October 2nd at Vajrapani Institute. If anybody has any questions about it, feel free to ask me. The program is still in development, but our working title or theme is Spiritual Friends on the Eightfold Path, and David Lewis is going to be our teacher.
And my apologies for this occasional beeping, because I'm wired up for a heart monitor for a week. So every time I leave stop recording, I would flash you, but that would be pretty
I thought it was timing.
So I have my electrodes so much. All right, so I guess at this point we can do our dedication. By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.